We'll also take a look at the controls for our new 2-speed ground drive transmission. So we replaced the 4-speed with a 2-speed. We still have the shift knob on the side of the armrest towards the back, and that's going to allow us to shift from first to neutral to second. Now, first is basically going to be our field gear. So we're going to use first when we're in the field. Second is going to be our road gear. So we're typically only going into second when we get on the road. When we look at this transmission, it uses larger hydrostats and motors than the prior transmission. So when we're in first gear with this one, we're going to have about the same pull-in power that we had in first gear with the 4-speed. But we're going to be able to get as much speed out of it in first gear as we got out of the old transmission in third gear. So much more functionality out of this transmission. This transmission is also a closed loop system. So what that means, we set our speed with our hydro handle and we can take our hand off. It's monitoring the ground speed, and it's going to maintain that ground speed setting that we've set. Now, another thing that you will notice with this transmission, you do have a high-low shift on the armrest. So you're able to shift that one on the fly, whereas the 2-speed shift here, we do have to stop, put the machine in neutral, and shift from first to second. With this one, we can shift on the fly, and we can configure that for the high and the low speed. So we'll go into the display and we'll take a look at how to configure that in the display. So when we come into the display to configure our transmission, if we press the back button, we go into Toolbox, we select the Driveline tab. There are a number of settings or adjustments that we can do in the Driveline tab. So if we look down the list, ground drive configuration, that's not something you want to mess with there. That's going to be if you decide down the road you want to put a set of tracks on one of these machines. The downside to changing this in the display is you do have to have an electronic service tool to change this back. So don't mess with that one. Leave it on whatever the machine is currently set up as. We've also got the auto Econ. So this is going to be active when we go into road mode. When we go into road mode, our high-low rocker switch on the armrest is no longer active, and auto Econ, if it is turned on, will be active. So when auto Econ is turned on, when we take off down the road and accelerate the machine, we'll see the engine RPMs go up to 2100. Once we get up to speed, if we're on a level surface, you'll see those engine RPMs drop down somewhere between 14 and 1600 RPMs, depending on the model of machine you have. If you approach a hill and start to go up a hill, you'll see those engine RPMs come up to match that ground speed. So it's very similar to driving our CVT tractors when we split both of those throttles. It's going to adjust the transmission ratio, and it's going to adjust the engine RPM to match the load on the engine. It's very responsive, does a really nice job when you're roading. It's going to be a little quieter in the cab when you're roading. It's going to save you a little bit of fuel when you're on the road with the machine. Now the other item that we have is auto low idle. So auto low idle, when I pull the hydro handle back to neutral, if I come to a stop sign, stop on the side of the road, it's going to drop that engine RPM down to its lowest idle setting. Now, one downside I have seen with auto low idle, if you're in a area with heavy traffic, you're on and off the side of the road a lot, auto idle can make it a little bit jumpy as you come out of neutral and go to take back off. So I've had some customers that will come in here and turn auto idle to no. If we scroll down in here to the bottom, this is where we can set our high range max and our low range max. Right now this machine is set to kilometers per hour, so we're going to change that quick. In our operator tab, we're going to select a new operator, and we're going to change those units to USA. So we'll run back over to our Driveline tab, scroll back down to the bottom, and now you can see while I'm in first gear, my high range max is currently set to 11.1 miles per hour. And the top end of this speed range is going to vary depending on your tire size and your wheel radius calibration that you have in your machine. My low range is currently set down at its minimum. So typically the way I set this up for first gear, if I'm harvesting at 5 miles per hour, I'll come in and I'll set my low range about a mile an hour faster than what I'm harvesting. And then I'll set my high range up at its max. That way when I'm in the field, I'm harvesting, I can put it in low range. My hydro handle is going to be less sensitive. It's going to be easier to fine tune that speed in the row. And then when I come to the headland, if I want some additional speed to cross the land, go back to the truck, I can reach down on my armrest, toggle into high, and get up to that higher speed. Now with your high-low shift on that rocker switch, we're not actually shifting anything in the transmission. So I've got the same pulling power in low range, or the low side of that rocker switch, that I've got in the high side of the rocker switch. So it doesn't matter which one of those I'm in. All I'm doing is adjusting the sensitivity of the hydro handle. So when I'm got it set like this one is to 11.11 on the high, the handle is going to go from 0 to 11.1. When I've got it set like this one at 6.3, the handle will go from 0 to 6.3. Now when I'm not in road mode, I can also adjust these in second gear. So to do that, I simply shift my transmission shift, my 2-speed transmission shift there at the back of the armrest. It refreshes these graphs, and now I can set them for my second gear. Now this is going to be active anytime road mode is turned off. And the way I typically set this one up is I'll come in here, I'll set my high range at its max. And then I will typically set my low range somewhere around 6 to 7 miles per hour. So what that allows me to do, if I've been roading the machine and I pull into the barnyard, I can reach up on the headliner, I can turn road mode off. It's going to go into my high setting. And then if I've got to maneuver around trucks, fuel tanks, whatever in the barnyard, I can simply take my rocker switch and toggle it down to my low setting. So that's going to get my hydro handle back to where it's going to adjust from 0 to 7.6 miles per hour. So it takes a lot of the sensitivity out of the hydro handle. It makes it easier to maneuver the machine. Now we're not going to have the pulling power that we would have if we stopped and shifted back into first gear, but we're not going to be as sensitive on the hydro handle maneuvering through a tight spot. Now one other item we'll look at that ties in with the transmission. If we go to our Combine tab and we scroll to the bottom, the newer versions of software give us 2 speed sensor types, and it's going to default to wheel. So when we're using the wheel speed, it's fairly critical that we go in, we get a good distance cal so that our yield monitor and our acre counter is counting correctly. We, on the later software, also have the option to choose GPS for that speed source. So when I choose GPS, it's going to go off of my GPS receiver speed. I typically recommend that we run GPS. GPS takes the variability out of our yield monitor as far as we load and unload that tank and change that effective tire radius. It's a little bit more accurate typically for a yield monitor. So I typically set that on GPS. Now if you lose GPS, it will go back to wheel. So you still want to make sure you've got a fairly good wheel calibration in that machine.